There are plenty of stadiums out there that are high achievers. For instance, Goodison Park has hosted more top-flight football than any other stadium in England. Franklin Field is the oldest stadium in college football, and Allianz Arena donates its blood to sick orphans every month. But these 10 stadiums have even more on their resume. They are in no particular order, but perhaps you could comment below which one you think has achieved the most. Or maybe I forgot a stadium that you think should have been included. Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. The nearly 100-year-old stadium has hosted well over a dozen teams over the years, including the Dodgers, Raiders, Bruins, and even the Chargers for a year. But the USC Trojans have been here from the start. It hosted the first ever Super Bowl and even 3 games of a World Series. But its crowning achievement would arguably be hosting both the 1932 and 1984 Summer Olympics. If this isn't impressive enough, in 2018 it was named as the host of the 2028 Olympics, making it the only stadium in the world to host 3. It was renovated in recent years and a lot of people aren't too pleased with the result. But, although it does look slightly unusual, I do love a blend of old and new. Thankfully they didn't touch this section, which is an original feature. Stadio Olimpico. The home of AS Roma and Lazio, and as the name would suggest, it too hosted the Olympics, back in 1960. It looked a lot different back then, and that's because it was extensively remodeled and refurbished for the 1990 FIFA World Cup, where it hosted the final. It's also hosted 3 Euro finals, although one was a replay. The design is not ideal for football due to the track, but any hope of some sort of reconfiguration to become rectangular were dashed when it was announced that it would be hosting the 2024 European Athletics Championships. But you already had that marked in your calendar, I'm sure. AS Roma have been trying to build a new stadium for quite some time, which would suggest that its glory days are well and truly over. Rome does have a habit of keeping stadiums a little past their use-by date though. Fenway Park. The home of the Boston Red Sox for over 100 years definitely hasn't hosted the Olympics or the World Cup, but it has hosted some games of 11 different World Series, and has the record for the longest sellout streak in Major League Baseball, at 794 games. 794 games! That was from 2003 to 2013, which shows you the mind-blowing number of games each team plays per year. The sellout streak was of course helped by the fact that it's a little too small for the demand that a city like Boston has for Major League Baseball. It's not because they can't afford to upgrade it, but it's cramped for room due to its location. They weren't thinking that far ahead when they built it in a densely populated area. But that constraint led to another achievement. Well, it's not really an achievement, but it has something that competes with the Hulk for being the most famous green monster in the world. It's a polarizing stadium, but you certainly can't call it dull. Olympiastadion. I could have possibly selected its cousin in Berlin, but if you're synonymous with Hitler, no achievement can make up for it. Yeah, I don't care if you're a car with its own free will, the Hitler factor overpowers that. Yes, I know that he didn't actually design the Beetle himself, but it was the brainchild of Hitler, everybody knows that. Whoa, we're gonna have to bleep that out. Anyway, this stadium's achievements are sort of lopsided in the past. It went bang bang hosting the Olympics in 72 and the World Cup final in 74. 12 years later, the 88 Euro final, and then things sort of tapered off. In the mid-2000s, Munich's 2 biggest clubs moved out to the aforementioned Allianz Arena, and the stadium's heyday was officially over. Besides its hosting achievements, I'm pretty impressed by its groundbreaking design. In particular, that roof that was actually inspired by a circus tent. It's quite hard to believe that it's a 50-year-old design. It still looks modern today. Estadio Azteca. Currently home to Cruz Azul and Club America. Shortly after it opened, it hosted football matches at the 1968 Olympics. Okay, that's not as impressive as actually hosting the Olympics proper. But after that, it incredibly hosted 2 World Cup finals just 16 years apart. Just to put that into perspective, England, the birthplace of football, has hosted just one World Cup, ever. Since then, it's hosted a couple of Gold Cup finals as well. At one point it could house well over 1,000 spectators, but since it's become an all-seater, it's a little under 90,000. Speaking of the seats, a lot of people don't like the garish and shameless nature of the advertising on them. But, I don't know, it adds colour. Something that's lacking on the old concrete exterior. Rose Bowl. This is where the Bruins moved to after they left the Coliseum. But the stadium is most well known for its hosting of its namesake game, the first of the bowl games, the Rose Bowl. That started out basically when the stadium opened nearly 100 years ago, and it's still going strong. It doesn't stop there, it's hosted 5 Super Bowls, and it's even crossed over to association football where it hosted the final of both the Men's and Women's World Cup in the 90s. The latter being won by the home team in the penalty shootouts. And much like Estadio Azteca, it too has hosted 2 Gold Cup finals. The stadium has remained very simple throughout its existence, but it's a timeless design, why not keep it that way? Melbourne Cricket Ground. Home of too many teams to list, but not just cricket as the name would suggest. It gets most of its use from Australian rules football, where it usually hosts a grand final in front of 100,000 spectators. But its cricket history dates back to before Australian rules football existed. It hosted the first ever Test cricket match way back in 1877 where Australia beat England. Also the first one-day international back in 1971 where Australia beat England. If that's not enough for you, guess what? It hosted the Olympics in 1956 where Australia beat England. I'm sorry, I'll stop. And it also hosted the less prestigious Commonwealth Games in 2006, where Australia beat England. Prior to those games is when the stadium became a somewhat symmetrical multi-tiered bowl, with the addition of a new stand. Michigan Stadium. The home of the Michigan Wolverines is not only the biggest stadium in the Western Hemisphere, but also Michigan has a higher average attendance than any other team in the world, at just a tick under 110,000 per game. Quite extraordinary, especially when you consider that Ann Arbor's population is just slightly more than that. In 2012, it set a record for the highest average attendance in college football history, at over 112,000 per game. It also has the modern era record football crowd of over 115,000, if you discount the one held at the Speedway. It's not just football though, it holds the record for an ice hockey crowd, and the record for the largest crowd at a soccer match in the US. I suppose the story is if you're the biggest stadium in the country, you're likely to hold several attendance records. As with all the college stadiums in this video, it has a fairly understated classical design. Estadio do Maracanã, currently home to Flamengo and Fluminense. The stadium was purpose-built for the 1950 World Cup, where it hosted the final in which a staggering 173,000 officially, but potentially much more people watched Brazil win. It took 64 years before the World Cup returned to Brazil, where a very different-looking Maracanã hosted the final, in front of a much smaller but presumably a much more comfortable crowd. 2 years later, it hosted the opening and closing ceremonies at the Olympics. I should also mention that it hosted the final round of the '89 Copa America. It's without a doubt the Southern Hemisphere's most famous football stadium. Today it's a fairly straightforward, slightly rounded bowl. Not the most inspiring design. I like those seats though. Caesars Superdome, home of the New Orleans Saints. You'll notice that it's the only stadium on this list with a commercial name. It's also the youngest. So you might be wondering what it's doing in this video. Well, I felt like I had to include the venue that's hosted more Super Bowls than any other. A grand total of 7. Of course, that largely has to do with external factors, but the stadium's achievements go beyond that. It is currently the largest fixed dome structure in the world after Homer and Bart defied the laws of physics and blew up the one over Springfield. It also survived a devastating hurricane, sheltering citizens in the process. So I'm gonna give it its due. And its heyday is not yet over. It will be hosting the 2024 Super Bowl. Well, 2025, but for the 2024 season. Most dome stadiums don't last all that long, but I hope it lives on and becomes an anomaly. And those were 10 overachieving stadiums. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.